And we have Mr. Adewale Ajayi, Partner and Head Tax, Energy and Natural Resources and Managed Services in KPMG in Nigeria, to discuss that with us. Good morning, Mr. Ajayi, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
So first of all, let me just ask, I mean, we've been on this for a very long time, since 2008. Did you expect that it to be passed yesterday?
Well, if you follow the commitment of the National Assembly, I wasn't really surprised, because all along they have demonstrated their commitment to passing the PIB. And I remember during one of those public hearings when they said it would be passed in June, we were all like, okay, let's wait and see. I guess it was coming in from the experience we've had since 2000, and then 2009 when the first PIB, was presented before the National Assembly. So I'd say kudos to the National Assembly. So I wasn't really surprised that they eventually got it passed. Of course, they still have to harmonize based on the reporting that your reporter has just given. Still have to harmonize the rate for the host community trust fund.
Yeah, so two issues have kind of delayed the passage of the PIB with respect to the fiscal provision and the host communities, like we had there. One of the houses is asking for 5%, and the other one is asking for 3%. So these are some of the issues. How has the PIB, now that has been passed, how has it resolved these issues? And how do you think we'll move forward with these two figures standing out for the host communities?
Okay, thank you for that. Let me start with the fiscal provisions. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in the NF versions of the PIB, right, like you rightly noted, has always been the issue of fiscal provisions. And it's because people felt that the provisions we currently have, they're not competitive enough, they're not fair, they're not equitable, and not sufficient, to attract investment. When you look at the very first version of the 2020 PIB, not 2021, that was presented, there's still a lot of issues that the stakeholders were looking at, the fiscal provision. But when you look at the one that was passed by both the House and the National Assembly and the Senate, yesterday and the day before yesterday, what you find out is that they made significant concessions. Number one, the hydrocarbon rates have been drastically reduced. The very first version that we had before now was talking about as high as 2.5%, and now that rate has been reduced to 32%. The same thing goes for royalty. The rates have also been significantly reduced. And I think one of the biggest challenges that the stakeholders have concern about is the cost price ratio limit, right, which was pegged at 65%. Even though the version that has been passed by both the Senate and the House, it talks about 65%. But what they've done is that they've decided to exclude certain big ticket items like royalties, like rents that are payable on leases, and of course, like contributions to funds like the host community fund, like the NNPC. So those ones have been excluded, and of course, they also have excluded funds for the reputation fund. So that will reduce the amounts of the minimum tax that will be paid if that reduction had not been made. So in a way, they've done that. And the other thing I was quickly say has to do with the relinquishment. Before, what we believed was that 40% of the existing acreages must be given up. But now, you can actually give up more than 40%, provided that you have your pursuits that meet certain criteria in terms of the areas that are producing, in terms of areas that have been upgrades or where there is significant discovery. So there have been some concessions in the fiscal provisions. So I think based on what we have now, we should be able to attract investment. All those investments that have been stopped because of uncompetitive fiscal provisions, I think we should be able to bring them on board. With respect to the host community, I think the issue is a bit different. When you consider the fact that currently the host community currently enjoys still the NNPC contribution of 3% of OPEX that oil producing companies pay, you still have the Ministry of Niger Delta that is responsible for the development of that area. And of course, there is 30% derivation formula that that the host communities are entitled to also based on the resources coming from the area. And of course, you then have a memorandum of understanding that provides facilities to the host communities. So when you look at the issue now, whether it should be 3%, 5%, 10%, initially the representatives of the host community were arguing for 10%. But when you look at the amount of funds that is dedicated, to the host community, I think the best way to start would be either the 3% that has been proposed, because again, this is cost. Because we have to also remember that that the oil producing companies still continue to contribute to NNPC, right? And so that would increase the cost, because one of the issues that we don't want to do, right, is to expand the list of taxes and levies that are payable by the oil communities, by the oil producing countries. So I think at the end of the day, we'll resolve the issue of 3 to 5%, right? But I think, what we have, right, will sufficiently address the concerns and the challenges that are faced by all stakeholders.
Okay. Well, but based on the existing laws, nothing, stops an entity from operating in more than one sector. For example, the upstream, midstream, or downstream sectors. But, with the introduction of the PIB, a company shall not be involved in more than one stream of petroleum operation. And would have to, register separate companies for each stream of petroleum operation. Does this not complicate things for investors who, have large capital to invest in different sectors?
You're right. I mean, that is one area of concern that stakeholders felt that they will have addressed, because we have companies today that carry out integrated operations. They are involved in both upstream and midstream. And now all of a sudden, what the PIB have said is that we need to have separate companies, for that purpose, right? But in the version that was passed yesterday and the day before yesterday by both the National Assembly, one concession they've given is that segregation will be tax neutral. In other words, the operators will not need to pay, capital gains tax or pay stamp duties. So that is one concession that they've given. I think what is underlining the demand for segregation is just the need to ensure that there is transparency. But at the end of the day, you have to go back to the economics on which a particular business, was actually started in the first place, because they would have started that particular business on the basis that it would be integrated. Now all of a sudden, to separate, those projects. So it's going to affect the project economics. But given where we are, I mean, it's obvious that the government has decided that the way to go is to segregate, right? And I think, we will have to go with that and see how we can manage or minimize the implications or the damage, to existing projects.
All right, so do you think with this passage now that it will transform the NNPC into an efficient and profitable company comparable to other national oil companies?
Well, it doesn't automatically translate. When you look at the objectives that are driving the incorporation of NNPC, the whole idea is that NNPC should be self-funded. Remember that one of the issues that we've had in the oil and gas industry has been the lack of finance or funding for JV operations, and NNPC has been the biggest culprit for that. So what we'll expect is that with the incorporation of NNPC under the cover, right, we'll expect NNPC to be self-funding, and so they'll be able to raise capital, right, to be able to execute the projects they have in mind. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to the commitment, it boils down to the will of the people at the helms of affairs of NNPC, and this is where everybody needs to pay attention to. Though on paper, NNPC should be profitable, but again, it all depends on how it is executed at the end of the day. We have the will to be able to transform NNPC to a company like Saudi Aramco or Petronas. That's really the question that is out there.
All right, but in your view, what is the unfinished business in this PIB for 2021?
Okay, if you remember when we passed the governor's bill in 2018, right? So after the PIB itself had been broken down into 4 elements, we then decided to pass the governor's bill, right? And the president, decided not to assent to it. And one of the issues, of course, was a perceived erosion of presidential powers or ministerial powers, as the case may be. Now, when you look closely at the PIB, what you find out is that the Minister of Petroleum will continue to exercise significant influence, over what happens in the oil and gas industry. Take, for example, one of the provisions requires the commission, right, to recommend the award of license, to the minister, and the minister can then decide, not to approve. Right? If it doesn't approve, it must give reasons, right? And if it doesn't approve within the stipulated period, then the award is deemed to have been given. But how do you deal with the situation where the same minister is the president, of the country that has the powers to nominate, and to remove, the members of the commission? So that is still an area. How do you deal with that influence that the president may exercise? And I think the other issue also has to do with the regulation, price regulation. we're still going to have regulation of prices, for gas price. And this is not surprising, given the fact that, power has not been regulated. So I can understand maybe in the interim, right, we go with regulation, but at the end of the day, we have to regulate, but that's really the way, to go. And of course, the other thing, that we need to talk about is, there's some issues, some, inconsistencies with respect to when royalties should pay. In one thing, some sections say it starts with 1 month after production, and another one it says 2 months after production. But I think, even given what we have, something that can be resolved through the annual finance bill. But I think we've come a long way, given the fact that it's taken us 20 years to be where we are. But I would say it is not yet to be.
Obviously, this is an ongoing discussion because when we even come to the implementation of it, taking it away from the document to the reality, that's also another aspect. But we really have to take a pause here. Thank you so much, Mr. Adewale Ajayi, Partner, Head Tax, Energy and Natural Resources, KPMG Nigeria, for sharing your thoughts on the passage of the PIB with us this morning. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you so much.